Sherry didn't make it any easier with the killer cleavage she was showing off and her obvious femininity. I was smitten, and if she had any idea how bad it was, she could have manipulated me the way she wanted. We enjoyed dinner and a couple of drinks before heading to one of the 2 dance salons in town. There was a country band with big cowboy hats and a good repertoire of songs. This girl was dancing with me, and if I had let her, she would have had sex with me right there at the table. I was damn grateful she didn't because I had a blast later that night. Sherry and I dated over the next few months, and many people began to see us as a couple. After about 6 months, she agreed to move in with me. At first, it was a little strange that there was another woman living in the house with me. Compared to Linda, Sherry was almost the exact opposite. Physically, she was quite petite, vivacious, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and very outgoing, and she loved to cook. As a local native, she loved everything about Centerville and the community so much that she was involved in one way or another in almost everything that happened in the community. This has led to some uncomfortable situations for me. Once Linda Harris Donaldson McCulloch became the bastard's wife, she easily entered all the social gatherings and clubs in the area. When she was just my mundane and boring middle-class wife, she never showed any interest in local events. Now she was everywhere and unavoidable, including at the same social events as Sherry. I should have avoided commitment when asked, but I didn't think about it at the time. The moment Sherry told me this, I would have done whatever she asked. "You need to rent a tuxedo," she said. "Why?" "Because we're going to the ball at Centerville Garden and you'll wear black tie, that's why." How could I argue with that? So I did. I tried on a black tie tuxedo and bought Sherry a fantastic dress for the occasion, and we went to the ball a couple of weeks later. It was one of those exclusive events, open to the public if you bought expensive tickets to the fundraiser and could afford black tie and an evening gown. Since Sherry had been a long-time member of the club, she was expected to attend with her gentleman escort. There were a lot of famous people in town, and on my way back from the restroom, I ran into one of them. She paid no attention, smiling at the nonsense her companion was spouting, and ran straight into me. Our eyes met, and I caught both fear and remorse before they darted away and then returned. "Linda," I simply stated this without much emotion. It was the first word I'd spoken to her since the night I found the papers on the kitchen table. In fact, it was the first time I had seen her since I stood in the courtroom to receive my sentence for beating up the arrogant asshole who stole her from me. She struggled to find the words she needed to say and could only whisper, "Liam, As I left, I heard her say this in a barely audible whisper. "I am sorry." I think I stopped for a moment, but I know I continued down the hallway and returned to the ballroom. Sherry was deep in conversation with 3 men and waved at me as I stood at the bar to refresh my drink. If there was one thing I knew, it was that I would never have to worry about seeing her get taken away by another man. She was burned in her first marriage by her dissolute husband and did not hide what she thought about my ex-wife. He tried to destroy her financially and almost succeeded until one of the husbands of the women he was running around with gave him a convincing argument to just leave town and not look back. He followed the advice and left everything to Sherry, and nothing has been heard from him since. When I returned to her, she introduced me to her companions, who turned out to be old friends of her family, one of whom led her to the dance floor, leaving me to entertain my new acquaintances. She at least winked when she did it. Later on the dance floor, she whispered in my ear, "Do you mind seeing her here tonight?" I knew what she was talking about. In the past, we talked at length about each other's difficulties. Her life was a closed book. Mine was still an open tragedy that never ended. I am fine. I ran into her in the hallway, but we didn't talk. I think she wanted to, but she couldn't, and I didn't want to hear anything she had to say. We danced in silence for a while, and then she hugged me tightly. Returning to the table was a different matter. We ended up walking past Mr. and Mrs. McCulloch, and the arrogant idiot tried to make that puckered sucking sound. But the block of ice, or maybe the false teeth I had given him, got in the way. However, I turned around, and at that moment I heard Sherry say, "4 years, Liam. It's not worth 4 years." She was right. I turned to my companion, but not before seeing the shame on Linda's face. Sherry and I didn't have sex that night. Instead, we made love for most of the rest of the night, and I think it was around 3 a.m. before we finally fell asleep. I've always wanted to see the sunrise sky through my bedroom window, and around 8 a.m. Sherry pulled back the curtains, and the bright sunshine of a clear Sunday morning flooded the bedroom. She stood there naked and beautiful before sitting down on the edge of the bed. "I want to leave the house today and ride into the mountains, but first, I have to tell you something," she said. The first thing that came to my mind was that she was going to have a baby. "I love you, Liam. I want you to know that I love you. I wanted to say it on the dance floor last night, and I wanted to say it last night when we made love, but I didn't, so I'm saying it now." I just pulled her to me, hugged her, kissed her tenderly, and said, "Sherry, I love you." And I was afraid it wasn't mutual, but now I know it's not. We ate a quick breakfast and packed our basket to head out onto the boulevard before heading out on our day's adventure. We had our picnic in a small meadow overlooking the expanse of Green Valley and enjoyed each other's company for a couple of hours. "Liam, do you think you two will ever properly consummate your marriage?" We did it. She decisively closed the case with a final decree of divorce and left me with almost everything we had in favor of running away with the gilded son of a bitch. There was a little anger in my voice that told us both that there was never really an end to this. I needed it, and we both knew it, but I didn't know how to do it. The next few months passed, and life on the home front continued in a nice, smooth direction. Sherry and I had a great relationship, and work was going well. Jake recommended me for a promotion, and the odds looked pretty good. The only downside to all of this was that every time I turned around, it was Mr. and Mrs. McCullough. They were interested in everything, and every time Sherry and I attended an event, I had to endure Daniel McCullough's ridicule and what eventually turned into indifference on Linda's part. I think the indifference was a cover for her own guilt, but by then we had divorced a couple of years ago, and I had moved on to a new woman and what I felt was a better life. However, the old burn was still there, so we didn't finish it properly. Then everything changed. Sherry and I were driving back from a charity event one evening when blue lights appeared in my rearview mirror. "Please get out of the car." I did as the deputy asked and stood at the back door of my truck as he walked around to the passenger side of the vehicle and asked Sherry for ID, which she provided. The other officer just stood there and watched me. I couldn't see what he was doing, but when he turned to his partner, he spoke. "Yes, indeed, there is one beautiful piece here, which is right in our hands. I think we should taste it." I rushed to the deputy sheriff, but he held me back and pulled out his weapon. At that moment, I froze and realized that in order to defuse this situation, reason and common sense would be required. "You're going to have to kill us in cold blood if you think you're going to continue, and I don't think you're going to do that," I told the deputy, holding me down. He simply laughed and waved to his partner, standing near the back of the truck. "Do you know how fast you were going?" "This was 30 miles more than expected." "Just stay here for a while until we write your ticket." When the idiot returned, he handed me a speeding ticket and said quietly, "Mr. McCullough says hi to you, and next time you're running around this county, I might just have a little fun. You understand?" I just took the fine and went back to the car. When I sat down, Sherry was crying and shaking from the experience. "Come to me," I said, and she moved towards me. "Did this son of a bitch even touch you with a finger?" He touched my chest, but that was all. At that moment, I was seething with anger, started the truck, and drove away from the scene. Later that evening, I sat down with Sherry and told her straight up that I was not going to put up with this, even if I got another sentence. "Liam, listen to me. I'm a big girl, and I know how to take care of myself. I don't want you to go to jail for doing something this time. Please don't do anything stupid. We both know who's behind this, and we'll find a way to deal with it." Jake sat me down after work on Monday and explained everything. "Young man, there are a lot of people here who don't like these sons of bitches, and I guarantee you that little deputy and his deputy will pay for what they did. Until then, you do your job, keep your nose clean, and keep loving that little girl, you hear?" I followed his advice and kept my nose clean. A couple of weeks later, as I was leaving the pub after work, a county sheriff's deputy rushed by, followed by another patrol car and a rushing EMS unit. The next morning at work, I found out what had happened. The two peace officers were wrapped in burlap and taken to a gravel pit, where they were urged in no uncertain terms to resign from their posts and leave the county immediately. They seemed to have a new respect for a lady named Sherry, who was very popular with several of the large, friendly men from the plant. Their departure will have to wait until they are discharged from the hospital. Once again, life continued as before, until the hounds of hell appeared in the form of Daniel McCullough. He and Linda went into the pub while Sherry, Jake, and I, along with a few other factory employees, enjoyed a few pints of beer after work. As usual, they were dressed as if they were heading to an event at a country club rather than stopping at a pub for a beer. Linda often went with me to this very place when we were married, but I never saw McCullough, Sperry, or Ledson. The door has been darkened at least once before. They took a table to the side of where we were sitting, and they were joined by the county sheriff in plain clothes and another couple I had never seen before. When I saw them out of the corner of my eye, Jake elbowed me in the knee. "Son, focus on what's happening here, at this table." There's nothing there but stinking crap. Sherry simply took my hand and we went back to our banter and discussion. A few minutes later, McCullough stood up and went to the restroom with two other men. Whether it was an accident or a coincidence, a moment later, Linda was standing on the edge of our booth. "Liam, can we talk for a few minutes soon? When are you able?" I looked at her and simply asked, "For what?" This earned me a strong kick to the ribs from my better half. Because the time has come, we or I should try to make things right if we can. I know you hate me, but I want to see this through to some end, the right way. About this time, McCullough and the other men returned from the restroom, and an angry McCullough came to our table. He grabbed Linda's hand forcefully and pulled her away from the table. I started to get up, but Jake stopped me. "She's his wife, not yours, Liam." Linda stood behind her husband and cowered, looking at the floor. The bastard spoke to me. "If I catch you talking to her or just seeing you next to her, I will gut you like a pig. Do you understand me, boy?" I looked up at him and said, "Go to hell." Maybe it was the confidence of impunity from having his friend the sheriff in close proximity, or maybe it was his sense of invincibility. Whatever it was, my comment prompted him to take his best shot while I was sitting there in the booth. He threw a girlish punch that grazed my cheek. Rushing forward, I grabbed him by the head, and I hit my face on the edge of the table. He fell backwards and sprawled prone on the carpet. The sheriff grabbed me by the shoulder, trying to arrest me for assault, but one of the guys at the other end of the booth held up a camera and let him know that the whole thing was on video. McCullough apparently made the first lunge and provoked the collision. The two men helped the emasculated asshole to his feet and led him out the door, followed by a completely upset Linda. "Jesus Christ. It was incredible," Jake exclaimed and raised his beer. "No better thing could have happened to this idiot. Linda should have warned him." I've been boxing most of my life ever since my dad threw a pair of boxing gloves at my brother and I and started teaching us how to box and defend ourselves when I was 12 years old. With witnesses who could confirm the true events, I felt pretty good. I felt fine until about 3 o'clock the next day. An excited Sherry told me, "One of the girls told me that Linda was admitted to the hospital this morning. She was pretty badly beaten. Her husband told emergency workers that she fell down the stairs because she was drunk." I knew this was bullshit. Linda no doubt drank alcohol, but only in moderation. I never saw her drink more than 2 drinks, even when we were dating and partying. She was only a fan of drinking a little socially. How badly is she injured? "Liam, she's in intensive care at Lane Memorial Hospital." I didn't say anything to Sherry, but there was no need to. She knew that I would go to her, whatever the circumstances. "Be careful," she told me. I pulled into the lot, parked my truck, entered the reception area, and walked down the hallway. I knew half the nurses in this establishment. It's a small town, and the girl on duty at the time had a brother who worked for me. She and her husband came to my place for a barbecue a couple of times. Annie, what room is she in? I'll be careful, I promise. She didn't hesitate at all. Room 1202, just around the corner. Please, slowly. Okay, and you can't stay for more than a couple of minutes. I thanked her, went around the corner, and looked into the room. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Her head was bandaged and her mouth and nose were swollen. Her right arm was in a cast, as was her left ankle. Her chest also appeared to be bandaged. She didn't sleep. I took her small hand in mine and tried to smile at the woman who had once been my wife. I didn't love her as much as I used to, but I still loved her to some extent, even if I hated the hell out of her. Coincidentally, by my count, it's been 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days since she let that bastard put a ring on her finger. I looked at it in my hand, leaned over and asked her, "He did this to you?" I didn't need any other words. I knew that getting drunk and falling anywhere was simply not going to happen to this woman. She looked into my eyes and nodded affirmatively. "He's not going to do it again, ever." I kissed her hand and left the room. The crackling groan of a house fire is an unforgettable sound. Burnt wood falls, further fueling the leaping flames. Firefighters may rush to a fire to pump tanker trucks of water onto the blaze, but living in the countryside comes with some costs. There are no fire hydrants to tap into, and 500 gallons of water, or even 2 or 3 times that amount, is no match for a fire monster with a 30-minute head start. The house was completely engulfed in flames, and orange-hot streaks of fire were already breaking through the roof when the first drop sprayed from the hose. All that firefighters could do was to contain the fire in the house and attached buildings. Other nearby buildings could only be doused with water to prevent them from catching fire from the intense heat and sparks. Sitting in the shade among the trees at the top of the hill, I watched the fire consume every remnant of what had once been the heart and soul of Daniel Patrick McCullough. His precious farm, his cars, his precious works of art, his 150 years of privileged history were all consumed by a hot and fiery vengeance. And all this because of someone else's wife. Smoke was still billowing from the charred wreckage as the morning light fell upon the fields, but I had long since moved on from the tragic scene. Sherry rolled over and pressed herself against me, urging me to wake up. I opened my eyes and saw her looking at me with a thoughtful expression on her face. "Time to wake up, sleepyhead. We promised my parents that we would have a barbecue with them this afternoon, and we have a lot to prepare this morning. I think Mom said she was expecting about 50 people this time. I haven't forgotten, but I'm a little tired. Jake and those drunks shouldn't have kept you up this late, baby." Of course she was right. And who was I to argue with the woman I loved? We arrived at her parents' house to help with the preparations, and by 1 p.m., people started arriving. The story on everyone's lips was about the fire the night before and how no one could find the owner of the house. I absorbed it all, every bite. It appears that Daniel Patrick McCullough has not been seen since the emergency personnel left the house to take Linda to the hospital. The rumor mill was in full swing. Some have speculated, for good reasons, that McCullough started the fire and escaped. Several more people came to realize that the old house was in fact a fire trap, and they were not at all surprised that it caught fire. Most had their own opinion one way or another, but no one had heard anything about the whereabouts of the owner. The BBQ ended in the early evening, and Sherry and I met up with Jake and his wife, along with a couple other friends, at our usual watering hole. I heard from the guys from the fire department that they found Daniel McCullough in the basement of a burnt house. "It looks like he hanged himself," Jake said in a muffled voice. We exchanged glances for a moment and showed shock on our faces, but if there was one grieving soul at the table for this pathetic bastard from hell, it was well hidden. "So, how did the fire start?" Jake's wife asked. "I don't know. They think it may have been old wiring, but the fire was so intense they may never know for sure. The guys said the fire inspector would be checking on the situation over the next few days, but they didn't think there was any foul play involved, like arson or murder, God forbid. No, it looks like this smarmy jerk took his own life beating his woman, and his damn house burned down right above him. Jake broke out into a smile at his last comment, and we all raised our mugs in a toast. The fire marshal completed his investigation and determined that the original fire was caused by poor wiring, possibly caused by a lightning strike. The sheriff's department determined that McCullough's death was a suicide, although I was questioned twice about my whereabouts on the night in question. There was no doubt about my alibi. It was rock solid with Jake and 6 other witnesses to back it up. A couple of weeks after the fire at Ladson, McCullough, Sperry, things started to get interesting. Federal investigators and bank auditors showed up and began investigating and auditing the firm's finances and investments. Although nothing criminal came of it, 2 months later, the company asked the federal bankruptcy court to reorganize. Instead, they faced liquidation when the feds slapped them with a couple of hefty fines for multiple violations. All this activity had little impact on Daniel McCullough's estate. Linda was discharged from hospital 2 weeks after her admission and moved into a guest cottage on the farm while she attended to her late husband's affairs. Surprisingly, he did not have a will, and he also had no other family other than Linda as his widow. Essentially, she will receive everything after the government receives its share. One of his ex-wives tried to do something about it, but their divorce agreement put an end to that pretty quickly. Her reign as the omnipresent Queen of Setterville seemed to come to an end the day her husband decided to unleash his irrational wrath on her. However, for someone who was looking for the green grass of a better life, she at least gained something by tolerating his beatings. All his wealth, acquired by dishonest or legal means, now belonged to her. I finally sat down with Linda Harris Donaldson McCullough to end what I never had. She knew some things but had no idea about many things. She never knew about the video that was played in the prison or about his toxic boasts in his office building that long ago day. Her face paled a little when I told her how much pleasure that video gave to the dregs of society in prison, but in the end, it didn't really matter. Liam, I know it won't change anything, but if I had to start all over again, I would never do it. I was ashamed of leaving you, and as soon as I did, I really regretted it. I was captured by the wealth and brilliance of a famous person and discovered that to this person, I was nothing. He wasn't the least bit like you. What I did learn was that I was just another one of his acquisitions. Somehow, because I was your wife, he decided to target you as some sort of enemy while he seduced me. You know, it was fucking stupid, all this wealth. There's no happiness in any of this. He was the most pathetic son of a bitch I ever knew once I really got to know him. He started beating me while you were in jail and didn't stop until he put me in the hospital the night he, well, committed suicide. At the moment of uttering the last words, she looked at me, slightly raising her eyebrow above one eye. I wasn't going to pretend that I understood what she was talking about. Now the big question is why, isn't it? There's no good reason, Liam. It wasn't you or what you did or didn't do. This was certainly not his manhood. God, what a fool I am. I left a wonderful man. Yes, Liam, you are a beautiful, smart, and caring man. And Sherry is damn lucky to have you. I gave it all up for what I thought was a wonderful life, better than the one I had, and now I have to live with it. Have you ever loved me, Linda? She sat for some time, lost in her thoughts. You know, I asked myself this question a million times, but I did it out of guilt and betrayal. And if I could convince myself that I didn't do it, I could then excuse what I did under the guise of something heroic or something like that. I never stopped loving you, Liam, even when I was in bed with the man I called my husband for 3 years. When you marry Sherry, I'll still love you, but I also know what I did to you, and there's no going back, right? I shook my head. She looked worse than when I was married to her. She was no doubt still a beautiful woman, more beautiful than any other woman in the city, but there was a new edge to her, from the beatings and the guilt. She was a different woman, and she certainly knew that I was a different man than the one who sat at that table in my kitchen and read her petition for divorce. I actually hugged her one last time, and also kissed her passionately one last time. I hated her to bits, but I still loved her. I played with the small box in my pocket, nervous as a church mouse looking out for the person's cat. Sherry looked beautiful as always. I asked her to dress up tonight because I wanted to take a walk around the city. We went to dinner at our favorite steakhouse on the outskirts of town, where we had our first date almost 4 years ago. Jesus, Liam, if you don't ask me soon, I'm going to have to go to the restroom. We both burst out laughing, and I fell to my knees in front of all the other customers and asked the woman I loved to marry me. When she said yes, I put my mother's ring on her finger and kissed her with a long kiss to the applause of all the restaurant patrons. Linda actually attended my wedding, invited by Sherry, but she missed the reception, and soon after that, she left the city forever. She came to town as the beautiful wife of a mid-level manager at a small manufacturing plant, and left town as the wealthy widow of another man who never realized the cost of his theft. About a year after she left, someone deposited a cool $1 million into my bank account with just a short note in the text box. Thank you for saving my life. I'm not one to complain about money. As for Daniel Patrick McCullough, he is just a memory and a note in the chronicles of the City Historical Society. Someone wrote a long obituary for him, describing all his countless achievements, but in the end, it all turned out to be rubbish. He died at the end of a short rope, with all his precious belongings about to burn in the fire around him. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story